I'd like to welcome each one of you to our devotional study today. I invite you to take your Bible, come with me if you would, to Esther chapter 2. And we're going to pick it up in verse 21 today. And once again, we are going to see the providence of God. We're going to see the fact that God is in control, even in the midst of a wicked plot that is happening here in this book. So, Esther chapter 2. And in verse 21, it says, "And in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king." So, what we see here is there are two officials in the government that plot the assassination, the death of the king. Verse 21 says, "In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate." So, we looked at that. Sitting in the king's gate is also an official position. It's a place, the gate was the place where the business of the cities was accomplished. Mordecai was in that position, and while he was there, he heard two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, that they were wroth and sought to lay hold on the king Ahasuerus. So, these two officials plot the death of the king. And, there were many times where those things happened, those plots took place where kings ruled, and many kings have been assassinated, many rulers of countries have been assassinated in the history of the world. And some people have tried to figure out why, and we don't know for sure. There's several possibilities as to why this plan came into action. Some feel that it was because there might have been a dissatisfaction over the humiliating defeat by the Greeks at Salamis. Others say that they could have been dissatisfied over the choice of Esther as the new queen. Possibly they could have even been dissatisfied over the promotion of Mordecai. And we can think about some of these things, and it might not have been any of those things. We can only speculate, for the Bible does not explain why they were angry and why they sought to lay hand on the king and have him killed. We don't know for sure what's taken place. The Bible is silent on the matter, and friends, a rule of thumb that we need to carry in our lives is this, that when the Bible is silent, we would be wise to be silent. Don't try to make dogmatic doctrine out of something that the Bible remains silent on. If it was that important, God would have told us. But what he did tell us is there was a plan there to try to harm King Ahasuerus, to have King Ahasuerus put to death. And then we see that it was providential. God put Mordecai in the right spot, that Mordecai could discover this plot and then reveal the plot to his niece, cousin, Esther. And Esther was in a strategic place that she could make the king known. Notice how it says in verse 22, "And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name." So we see God working. He put Mordecai in the right place that Mordecai could hear. He put Esther in the right place so that Esther would be able to communicate this to the king. Reminds us of the blessed truth in Romans 8:28 that all things work together for good to them that love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. And friends, even I like how Joseph put it when he talked to his brothers. He said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." And friends, God is always working behind the scenes, even in the evil situations, even in the difficult situations. God is working behind the scenes. And my responsibility, friends, is to trust him. And then notice it says that she certified, Esther, this is important, it says in verse 22, and the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. Notice this thing, Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. Keep that in mind. Underline that. Highlight it in your mind or even in your Bible, because it's going to become very important here in a little bit that we understand that Mordecai gets the credit for the rescuing of the king, for the uncovering of the plot to assassinate the king. And we're going to see in just a few chapters how that is a crucial piece of information, that it was in Mordecai's name that this was revealed. The time is coming that Mordecai will get repaid for passing on this piece of information. Reminds me of the blessed truth of Proverbs chapter 13. Proverbs 13 verse 21, it says, he that walketh with wise men, evil pursueth sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. Evil pursueth sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. And we're going to see how all of that plays out in just a little bit. And Mordecai is going to get repaid for the good that he does just a few chapters from here. Friends, we need not be surprised by how God is going to use this event to ultimately bring glory to him, to deliver the Jewish people, and to save Mordecai. In Acts chapter 15, verse 18, it says this about God. It says, known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. Friends, there is absolutely nothing that happens in this world that takes God by surprise. What happens in our lives may take us by surprise, but there's absolutely nothing whatsoever that happens in this world that takes our God by surprise. Now, as we bring this chapter to a conclusion, back in Esther chapter 2 and verse 23, we find that not only is the matter revealed to King Mordecai, or to King Ahasuerus rather, but then we see in verse 23 that swift justice is done to these men for the plot that they make against the king. Notice what it says in verse 23, and when inquisition was made, in other words, they inquired about the matter, they checked into it. When inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, these two men that were plotting to kill Bigtha and Tereth, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So they met their justice. Justice was performed. They died for this plan that they had to kill King Ahasuerus. And it's important to note that this whole account was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king, because that's also going to play an important part as we get to the end of this book, or toward the end of this book. And we'll see how God is working all the way along, not only to uncover this scheme, and that it would be uncovered in Mordecai's name, but also that it was written in a book, because that's going to become very important a little bit later on. Friends, sometimes people wonder how these wicked kings prosper without anything happening to them. And of course, they did not get by with their evil deeds. This same Xerxes was later assassinated in 465 BC through the same kind of a plot that had been foiled in this chapter later on in his life. That plot is going to be successful, and he is going to be killed. But friends, God works behind the scenes, and we need to remember that God ultimately is the one with whom we have to do, and that we will stand before God and give an account of our lives and what we do with our lives. Friends, our lives are a stewardship. Everything that we have is a stewardship. It is not ours. It has been given to us by God. And may we use the time that God gives to us for his honor and for his glory to accomplish his purposes and his will in this world. And friends, even when we mess up, even when the people around us do things that are not according to God's plan, rest assured, we are not big enough to thwart the purpose and the plan of God, that God works behind the scenes, that God is providential, that he is in control, that he rules in the kingdoms of men, and he gives them to whomsoever he will. And ultimately, God's plan will be accomplished in this world, and God's plan will be accomplished in our lives. Have a great day.